everybody, and welcome to GenFriends. I'm your host, Cheri Hudson Passey from Carolina Girl Genealogy, and we have got a fabulous show for you. First of all, let me introduce our regular panelists. We've got Bernice Bennett. Hello, Bernice.
Hello, Cheri.
Writer, instructor extraordinaire down there. And then we've got Shelley Murphey, aka the Family Tree Girl, is with us tonight. Hey, Shelley.
Hello.
So glad you're here. And we have got a very, very special guest. We have Ric Murphy, who is a genealogist and author. He's also the vice president of the Virginia Afro-American Genealogical Society. Is that correct? Did I say that right?
No, it's the national vice president. So I'm national.
National vice president. Yes. All righty. Okay. Well, we are so happy that you're here because you are here to talk to us about the 1619 project. And what I'm going to do is just let you take it over and let us know. We've heard a lot about it in the news lately. We heard about it at a recent FGS conference, and it was something new to me. So I think it's probably something new to a lot of people. So why don't you just start, Ric, by telling us what is the 1619 project?
Well, first of all, Cheri, it's an honor to be here and with your special co-host here. I see them in my travels all the time, so it's really an honor. 1619 is a really important moment in African American history, but it's also a very important moment in American history. It was the arrival of the first documented Africans on April 25th, 1619, and that's really the beginning point of African American history and all the great things that we as Americans of African descent have contributed to the country. The last couple of weeks, for those who have been involved in a number of the commemorative events on Landing Day, Ground Zero was Fort Comfort in Hampton, Virginia, where dignitaries from all over the country and dignitaries from Africa attended to commemorate this most historic moment.
And Ric, that was down in the Hampton area, correct?
That's correct, at Point Comfort.
Okay, great. And
August
25th, I watched everything online. So that was awesome and amazing what was going on down there. A lot of it, people were FaceTiming it and, live streaming some of it. So I was glad I was able to see it. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend because I was up in the Washington, D.C. area at FGS, Federated Genealogical Societies, meeting with all of the national genealogical societies and explaining to them what 1619 was all about Project 1619, and the importance for genealogists, for those who are European Americans who are finding out that they have African descent, as well as Americans of African descent, the importance of that particular day and the history and surrounding it.
So Ric, when I hear you speak of 1619, I've also observed others who have no idea what you're talking about. So let's talk about why this history has not been something that's a part of the American history story for as long as America has been here.
Well, first of all, I think there's been a general perception that all who came from the African continent were the same in terms of how they came here. Up until 1997, no one knew until Engel Sluter did a rather comprehensive research project where he actually found out that the first documented Africans who came here came from Angola. They came from the very specific city, Cabasa, Angola. We know what date they left Angola. We know what ship they came on, which was the San Juan Bautista. And we know specifically how that ship was pirated by the White Lion and the Treasurer, and how 60 of the captives on that ship happened to come to Point Comfort, Virginia. So there's a lot of things that we didn't know about until recently. Because of that, it's now directed our attention to records in Africa, records in Portugal, records in Spain, records in England, Jamaica, Bermuda, Mexico, and more important, records in England and here in Virginia. And because of those records, we can now begin to construct not only the events that took place, but the unique events about the activities that almost got England and Spain into war over these 60 some Angolans. And those records also help us to reconstruct the lives of those actual Angolans. So that's very unique in terms of African American history, to know the city that they came from, the country they came from, the date they left, the circumstances that brought him here, and also to find them in the actual colonial records, which can be found in Virginia and 8 of its counties here in the state of Virginia. So there's a lot of uniqueness around these particular Angolans. And in addition to that, we're also beginning to find out that these first Angolans did not live like all of the other Africans who came behind them, meaning that they were not enslaved. So they happened to live in the colony at the exact same time when everybody else was born in a foreign land other than the indigenous people who were here. So there's so much uniqueness about these particular Angolans. And in addition to that, the actual lives of those Angolans are now beginning to be researched, where we're finding out that they had very profitable lives. So there's a lot of uniqueness about this particular incident and these particular men, women, and children who came here.
So you say men, women, and children.
Correct.
Tell us how many actually can be documented and how many children, because I've heard men and women, but I haven't heard children.
We know from the records from Portugal that there were 350 Angolans that were put on the ship San Juan Bautista. We know from the ship manifest that shortly after they went to sea, approximately 100 died. That was in the captain's manifest. We know that so many became sick that the ship stopped in Jamaica. And to get food and medicine, they had to trade 24 young boys. So that's the first clue that we learned that there were children on the ship. Once they left Jamaica, they were 500 miles off of the coast of what is present-day Mexico, and that's when they were pirated by the 2 English ships. Once they were pirated by the 2 English ships, they took the 60 healthiest who were on the ship and split it between the 2 pirate ships. When they came here, we did not necessarily know what their ages were, but when we begin to find them in the colonial records, we can begin to estimate guesstimate what their ages were when they came here, based on certain facts within the census and the musters that were taken in the colonial period and approximately the time that they died. So there are a number of clues that tell us that some of these Angolans, in fact, were children. When we say of children, they were probably in their pre-teens or early teenage years, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That was a very important time, because it was also a time when Englishmen who were coming here, they sent young boys here because they hoped that they had long lives and would become productive within the colony. So it was not unusual for a 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old English boy to come here. So it was not unusual to have that same age group for the Angolans to come here as well.
I guess y'all can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden for a while I was talking and nobody could hear me. I'm fascinated by you talking about the records. So you said that these records were discovered in the archives in Virginia. Where were they found, the records, so that you could document these people coming over from Angola and living in the colonies? Has it been well known that this happened, but there weren't records, and now recently records have been found? Or has it just been a slow process of just gathering things along the way?
Well, we've known for 400 years the letter from John Rolfe to Sir Edward Sandys, where he indicated in a letter that approximately 20 and odd Africans came here. So that has been the most prominent document that historians have always known about. But above and beyond that particular record, because no one knew their names. They didn't know where they came from. They didn't know where they lived. No one really looked in the colonial records here in Virginia for these particular Angolans. Once folks started to look for them, they've actually found them in the census. They actually found them in terms of land records. They found them in terms of head rights. They found them in wills. They found them in a number of different documents. So those of us, like Shelley and like Bernice, who are conducting research, we now are looking for these specific documents. And it's one thing not to know that they were there, but now that we know that they're there, so there's so many people who are documenting this stuff that it makes it just absolutely fascinating. The other key thing is, I think DNA has helped this process an awful lot. DNA, there are Americans of European and African descent who are now beginning to find out that they actually descend from Africans in the early colonial period, and people are now looking for the documents to see if they can document themselves. So what's happening is a lot of people who know that their ancestry came from Jamestown or from Warwick County or York County or any of the Charles City County, as they're doing their genealogical research to verify the DNA, and they're using their research to understand their DNA, they're beginning to look for these records, and lo and behold, that's where they're beginning to find them.
I think that's fascinating. And I know that at one point we were in a meeting, a luncheon or something at FGS, and the question was asked, do we have any descendants of these 20 and odd? And people raised their hands. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating that they have been able to document and know that they are descendants of these people that came over from Angola, were brought here from Angola.
And Chrissy, and what's really interesting is when they ask that question, one would presume that it would be the African Americans who would raise their hands.
Right.
But what we're finding is Native Americans are raising their hand, European Americans who are of Irish descent, Italian descent, Swedish descent, Danish descent, Scottish descent, raising their hands because they're finding out themselves that they have this Angolan blood in them. And that's because during that early colonial period, everybody was intermarrying one another because there were so few people here.
Exactly, exactly. And again, it just brings us to the fact that we are all in this together, you know. We really are.
We're in different boats, but we're all in together.
We're all in this together. So go ahead, Shelley.
Yeah, Rick, help us understand, because I hear the comment quite a bit, and in your talks also. And matter of fact, he'll be at the Library of Virginia Saturday, so I'm going to get that out real quick.
Thank you, Shelley.
Speaker. Anyway, Saturday, September 14th. But help me understand, or the audience understand, because Jamestown would not have survived if it wasn't for these Angolans. And if you can now help explain that, because that's some of the questions and feedback, because a lot of people will think that these 20 odd that came over from Angola would have been either, you know, they're enslaved on that ship, but they're not enslaved when they hit ground here in British, colonial British America. But these were not field type people from what I understand. So if you will share that, I think that's very interesting for people to understand how this country would not be where it's at if it wasn't for those 20 odd.
Well, there's two components to the story, and I think it's really important to kind of break the story out a little bit. When these Angolans came here in 1619, there were very, very few people here in the colony. Everybody was born someplace else other than the indigenous people. There were two groups of people. There were the English who were here. The majority of the English were poor, and those poor English had no experience with agriculture. They had no experience with animal husbandry. They had no experience in growing crops in semi-tropical climate. So the skills that they brought here, while they had skills, they were not necessarily compatible with what the colony needed for survival. The second group of people were these 20 and odd, and the reality is was 32 Angolans based on the 1620 census. Where they came from in Angola, the city of Cabasa, was a very, very interesting city. It was a commercial city. It was a well-educated city, a city that had been conducting commerce with the two superpowers of the world at the time, Spain and Portugal. It was a Catholic city. So most of the people in the city were Catholic. They had Catholic names, and they had a Catholic religion. In 1619, when they discovered that the city was on top of a silver mine, the Portuguese brought 36 ships with soldiers, and the attempt was to eradicate the people so they could take the silver out of the mines. And the first people they took out in 1619 were the wealthy, the educated, the learned, the Catholic clergy. So these folks were very, very intelligent, and that's what you usually do when you go in a community. You take out the powerhouse. So the powerhouse, they knew about farming, they knew about herding, animal husbandry, tobacco growing. So when they came here in 1619, every single plantation had not had a single profit at the time those Angolans came here. In fact, the colony was close to bankrupt, and they were getting ready to fold the colony up because it was a bankrupt colony. So the Angolans, when they came here, they came at a unique time where they helped to build a colony because the cash crop at the time was tobacco. And lo and behold, here came a group of people who knew how to grow tobacco in a semi-tropical climate. They were merchants, they were farmers, they were herders, and every skill that the colony needed at that time, all of a sudden here comes this group of educated people who were able to help them do that. Fascinating story, and quite frankly, the real story that probably will be told next year and the year after is the individual story of each of these particular Angolans, because when you get into their specific histories and stories, it's mind-boggling. It's not what you would think of traditional Africans who came here, because that's what history had us believing all along.
I was just going to remark, why isn't that in our history books? Why haven't we been learning this? It's frustrating, to know that there's this whole part of history that we know nothing about, and it should be there. And so this project is helping to get the word out. I was reading about it, and from what I was reading, most of these people, but if I'm saying it correctly, most of the people were brought over kind of like indentured servants, were able to buy their freedom. Is that correct? They didn't continue in slavery through the generations. Were most of them freed or freed themselves? Is that correct, or am I reading that wrong?
No, you're reading it. You're reading it correctly, and I'll try to make a complicated story uncomplicated. Okay. When the English came here, 80% of them were English poor. They were peasants. Mm-hmm. And they came here under what they called indentured contracts.
Right.
It was an incentive plan. Mm-hmm. So if you go and work in the colony in America, after a certain period of time, usually 7 years, we will give you your freedom. They also had the head right system. So every head, where somebody brought somebody here, they were given 50 acres of land. So there were these built-in incentive programs to populate the colony. So that's really the most important thing that has to be conveyed, is they needed to populate the colony. These particular Angolans were here at that exact same time where your value was important, and based on your value, you became free. And when they became free, their descendants became free. There was no law on the books until 1662 relative to slavery. Half a century after these particular Angolans came here. So see, again, we all think from the history books that every African who came here was enslaved. The reality is every laborer was enslaved in some sort or another through these indentured contracts, where they were bound for a certain period of time, and then they became free. These Angolans, because they were merchants, what happened is they began to sell and buy land, sell animals. The tobacco they grew, they began to sell, and that's how they were to buy the animals and buy the land. So they were very, very wealthy, and some of them were quite wealthy, perhaps even wealthier than many of their English counterparts, which we don't know. We didn't know. But he's now finding these documents in the colonial records. We can actually find the head rights. You can find the animals that they own. They actually branded the animals with their own brand. They had their own land. They sold their land. They willed their land to their children. So it's really a fascinating story. And this is a story that's not going to disappear anytime soon.
Absolutely right. It is fascinating, and it's a story that needs to be told. Where's the project now, and what are we looking forward to in the future? I know that you just had the big ceremony, the 400-year ceremony and recognition. And so what are you doing now to move forward? What can we all do to help?
Well, let me make a distinction. Project 1619 is a separate nonprofit group based out of Hampton, Virginia. Its chair is Calvin Pearson. They did an absolutely phenomenal job in terms of pulling this event together. They've been working on it for the past 10 years. The Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society, we supported them, we augmented them, we offered our skills, our services to help them any way that we can. Project 1619, there are a number of other initiatives that they're beginning to launch. The Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, AUGS, we're going to be building on the history component of this, and we're also going to help Americans of European and African descent connect to their ancestors, so that way we begin to have a vested majority of people who understand this history and make sure that it's part of their own family history as they pass that legacy on from generation to generation. We can't let this, now that we're learning about it, we can't have it lost.
Exactly. It can't be this one-time thing that happens and then nobody talks about it again, because as we've talked about on this show before, if a story isn't told within two generations, it's gone. Nobody remembers. And that's, probably what happened with this story is people weren't passing it down. It didn't get put in the history books. Well, a lot of things that should be in history books are not in the history books. And so, stories get lost and families don't tell the tales, and then we don't know about it anymore. So this is a fascinating group of people.
Well, there's a segment to that. There's a reason why it wasn't told. Because as the slavery laws came in, the legislators did not want the story to get told, because now they needed this additional black labor to come in to enslave them. And again, the Angolans who came here could read and write and compute. They didn't want Africans to come here who could read and write and compute, because they were competing with the Englishmen. They didn't want Africans to come here to own land. So first of all, they passed a law that you couldn't read and write. They passed laws that you couldn't own land. They passed laws that you couldn't have your own animal. So they began to incrementally pass these laws so that they can enslave for generations all of the Africans who came after these folks here. So there's very specific reasons why we don't know this history.
So with Bernice and I on here, we both research, and Bernice is researching Virginia now, because she's got, I say this saying, all roads lead to Virginia.
Absolutely.
So Bernice is now finding she's got a lot of roads coming into Virginia.
A whole lot of roads. You're right.
and it's interesting because DNA wise, we connect to several people, but we don't connect. So it's very interesting. Eventually we will. But
Yes.
One of the common things I'm going to share with Ric right now is she has goings just like you and I.
know that. Yeah.
Yes. And so, eventually she might get back to where, she's going to be involved, because there's a list of names that people call out. And I think that would be interesting to share some of those names, and I'm calling out one, which is Goins, because that's my family as well.
Shelley,
So,
I was just going to ask that question.
oh,
What are some
I'm
of these?
sorry.
No, I'm glad you. No. I was going to say, what are some of these names?
Yeah, I'll let Rick take that. He's our guest.
Well, I like the picture of Shelley, and if we can keep that up for a second, because behind Shelley is a tree. And you'll notice that tree has deep, deep roots.
Yeah.
And if you'll notice the branches of the tree, it spreads all out. And that's really the story of these Angolans.
Yes.
Now, Shelley and I, although we both share the same name, Murphy, we both know that we're related through the Goins family. I'm well aware that Bernice is a Goins. There's John Goins, there's Margaret Cornish, there's Emmanuel Driggers, there's Anthony Johnson, Mary Johnson. There are the Blizzards. There's the Tuckers. There the I can't think of all the names.
Did I say Chivas?
No, Chavis came later.
Chavis later. Okay.
Chavis was on the Fortune.
Got it.
Juan Pedro.
Longo.
Juan Pedro was one of the names.
Combo.
Mazingo, Edward Mazinga was another one. So there were probably about 15 family names that we are definitively able to identify. And those that we can identify come directly from the colonial records.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is their descendants by the thousands are coming forward, and that's because of DNA, and they're actually able to trace it back to the colonial period.
I love it.
And someone's collecting that information and building that database on that. Isn't that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Someone is actually building that database. So this story is not ending in 2019.
Oh, no.
It's definitely going further, and more people are aware now. And so the research has increased. And I think that's the real powerful story there, is the increase of the research that's happening. Mm-hmm. Because I'm going to say traditionally, African Americans typically will stop just before the Civil War. I mean, seriously, as far as how far they can get back. We got the challenges and things, but to hit that colonial period and pre-colonial period, you're looking at different record sets, and it takes on a whole, new names, new places to look. It's not the obvious that's hanging on Ancestry or Family Search. You have to go local for a lot of these records. The Library of Virginia has a lot of records, which is helping a lot of people across the country. So I'm excited the fact that people are digging deeper prior to the Civil War and coming on into the colonial period, where I concentrate at, and Rick as well. And we're going to welcome Bernice on into Virginia, definitely, and get her tied in here. So, because I think we're all connected at one point, especially with just that's just one name is the Goins line, and it's everywhere like Smith and Johnson. So it's really fascinating.
And it's really fascinating that we have someone like Ric Murphy. Yes. And Rick and the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society have really taken the lead from a genealogical perspective to get this word out. And I'm really happy that this is happening, because Rick spoke last year at the OGS conference in Pennsylvania, and he really, kind of riled the group up. And
just a little bit.
But the point is that we have someone who has studied this and is going out and sharing information, because you have a lot of misinformation also being communicated. So how do you get the right information to people so that they can then say, wait a minute, I need to learn more? And I think that's where we need to start having more education programs, having more talks, and bringing experts together to really talk about how can we get this and the mainstream so that everybody is talking about the Africans that came to America back in 1619 in colonial America.
Well, you
But
know,
I think the
Bernice,
thank you goes to Cheryl for having Ric on. It's one.
and
Thank you
Bernice,
goes to Bernice for saying, Bernice, I know who we need to have on.
well, but I think Bernice and Shelley raised two very interesting points about 1619. I really think this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
I think this is the beginning.
Yeah.
For African Americans, for so many of us, when we were in school, when the issue of slavery came up, it was a period of time to kind of shrink down in your chair because the way it was taught, the way it was conveyed. While we talk about these Angolans from 1619 and that they were not enslaved, I think the key lesson out of this is that we're all beginning to realize that while some of us may have free African ancestors, most of us had enslaved African ancestors. And through this process, we're beginning to realize that they built the country. The country was built on their backs, that our economic foundation was built on their backs. I think the story out of the New York Times that talks about how Wall Street was built on the slave industry. So all of a sudden, there's now a new pride of who our ancestors were, whether they were free or whether they were enslaved. And as Shelley indicated, when a lot of people did research, they hit that glass wall of 1870. But now people are beginning to realize that they had ancestors who served in World War I, the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. Bernice and Shelley and I descend from Africans who served in the Revolutionary War. So when we look at the American flag, we now begin to realize that's our flag, not their flag.
Right.
When someone says you need to go back where you came from, I chuckle. Should I be going back to North Carolina or Virginia? Because that's where my people came from. And the reality is, in 1619, when the Angolans came here, you've heard me say twice, nobody was born here but the indigenous Native Americans. Well, quite frankly, the African Americans we are now the second indigenous people of North America. That's because this is where some of us are 15, 20 generations into this country here. So this is our flag. This is our country. This is our story. This is our history. I don't think it's going to go away. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. And more people are embracing it because they're beginning to realize this is our story.
I love that. Now, Shelley mentioned, there's a database. People are trying to, get their DNA and see if they can connect. Is there a place where people can go to get involved with a DNA database? And is there a place where people can go to get involved in seeing a paper trail of if they're connected with surnames and things? Is there some place people can go for after watching the show to get more information, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, there are several I'll say entities that are getting to do that. There are some private individuals who have really taken this to the next level. I think it's best that they kind of share their own stories. I know OGS is in the process. We've always had a database of family names, and that's going to be one of our major initiatives. And we're going to make a major announcement in October on some of the things that we're doing to help people do this very thing. So I think there's a lot of different groups out there that are going to be doing stuff. I think you're going to hear some really phenomenal stuff that's going to be announced over the next, 4, 5, 6 months. So the answer is yes. Stay tuned. Do your documentation. Get to learn your DNA and how you're related. Do your legal paperwork. So be ready when this stuff comes forward so you can automatically be part of it, because I think it's going to be really exciting. And that's why I don't think this is going to go away.
I agree. I actually have a Facebook page. It's a closed group and it's Goins. And what's happening in there is the sharing of information. That's what's key. If I've got a resource or a tool and I find stuff and I share it with 100 other people that are there, all looking for the same type thing, and I'm documenting how I'm doing it. That's why I keep asking so many questions of folks, is to be able to compile this so there will be a path, you know, that people can go through. And I'm speaking at the OGS conference on African American challenges, which will include getting through this period, you know, colonial period. And one compliments, or not compliments, but resources that I'm using came from another person who successively already researched her husband's line, made it all the way back, comes down from Miss Cornish, and was to use those patent records. A lot of people don't even know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about patent records.
Right.
So that's one thing I'm throwing out. Definitely, if you're looking in Virginia, go to the Library of Virginia and start going through the boxes. I got 1 through 20 right now. Someone else has got 22 through 30, and it's going online, looking at these patents from like 1623 to, I forgot, I think 1643. And this is the work that has to be done. So I'm excited about OGS being in here and the other resources that we have available to us at this time for this research.
Wonderful. Ric, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
And talking to this is honestly a new topic for me, that I have just, ever since, you know, I started hearing about it, that I have been looking into and trying to learn about, and trying to figure out why I didn't know about it before. I mean, it's just, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are feeling the same way. Wait a second, this is a big thing that happened in history, and why has it taken 400 years for us to
That's right.
to figure it out? And so I am grateful for the education that you've given me through this, and I'm hoping that as people watch this, we're educating others, and we can work together to get these stories out, and get people connected, and get their names remembered, and everybody along the way, along the path from 1619, you know, back to Angola and forward to today, that we can get these lines connected.
Well, you can tell I'm very passionate about this. I could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I would be very honored to be invited again to talk about this, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. And I get 2 of my cousins who will co-host this evening, so it's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and we will. I can't wait for these announcements. Maybe once these announcements come out, we can have a part 2 and just say, hey, wait, there's more.
There we go.
I look forward to it.
Great
What
idea.
you can do. So thank you, Ric. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Bernice, for being on tonight. And we are so grateful for the viewers that watch, and we will put some links in the blog post to help you learn a bit more about the 1619 project, and things that maybe you can do to help keep this in our minds, and to help others as they're searching for their ancestors. And with that, goodbye, everybody, and we will see you next time on GenFriends. Bye.